Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
And I actually think I turned the show on before I started yapping today. That's always a sign of progress. You can teach an old dog new tricks, or remind the old dog of tricks they supposedly had learned. How you doing? It's Thursday, the 5th of December, and it's cold. It's so cold. I want to warn you that you might have some sound effects early in the program. My dog is still here in the room, and someone is coming to walk him, and that person may be greeted by excited barks. So just saying. Hey, speaking of dogs, they're the best humans in the universe. And I've always been fascinated by the domestication, the symbiotic relationship of dogs and humans. And I'm not alone. Obviously, scientists have long tried to figure out when it happened, how it happened, where initially it happened, and nothing is necessarily agreed upon by any of them. And they only have like fossil records to go on. But another fossil has been found, an old, clearly canine dog bone in Alaska, and it dates to, trying to remember here. Well, I can't remember. It's old. it's really old. It's like, I don't know. I mean, we're talking 15,000 years ago or something. Don't quote me. But the interesting thing about this particular bone that was found, that is clearly a wolf or dog bone, is that they can tell from the looking at what the bone is made of, that the animal to which the bone belonged had a diet that was really heavy in salmon. Now, stop and think about that. How does a dog catch a salmon? They don't, generally speaking. Maybe there is a possible way every once in a while that a dog would come upon a salmon, but salmon is something that humans were able to catch. And so the assumption is that this dog, whose bone's been found, was fed salmon by a human. And I guess this is causing a stir among people, scientists, the timeline of human and dogs in North America, and whether or not the dog was domesticated earlier than we had thought. And because it's generally assumed that humans and dogs first came together somewhere in Eurasia, and it's long been argued about whether or not when humans came, probably across the Bering Straits to North America, whether or not the dog had already been domesticated and dogs came with the first humans to this hemisphere. But the fact that this dog clearly had a salmon-heavy diet, and how old the bone uh, is causing quite a stir. Um, by the way, the particular bone is called the Swan Point bone, and it again could be a sort of wolf dog, but whatever it was, it appears domesticated enough that a human was feeding it. I've told you once before the subject uh, that that most fascinated me um, is about brain size in dogs and man. When it's clear, I guess, and this is agreed upon, that when dogs and humans came together and decided that their relationship was definitely mutually beneficial, at that period in time, and again, it could be 20 to 15,000 years ago, the brain size of both dogs and humans decreased. Decreased. As soon as the symbiotic relationship had kicked in, both species, dogs and humans, had less need for certain parts of their brain that had been very busy before. Humans, because they no longer needed to be quite as vigilant when they were trying to sleep, because the dog would be security for them. And dogs did not have to be as busy trying to find food constantly because humans would feed them. And so both brains, canine and human, decreased. I love that. Okay. My dog, by the way, has just left the building quietly. So much for him creating a stir. Okay, I would not have started with that dog stuff if I hadn't tried to warn you about the potential of my dog making noise, and he didn't. This killing the targeted killing of this health insurance CEO in New York is quite a story, isn't it? You know, the brazenness of the assassination, the fact that the assassination of CEOs is not exactly a thing. We kill school children in this country with an incredible regularity, but we don't kill CEOs. And in fact, CEOs generally have a lot of security around them, lest somebody try to kill them. Another astonishing thing about this now dead CEO is that he had no security. It's pretty astonishing. And it turns out that in corporate America, it is very unusual that the company did not provide him security. And he obviously didn't feel he needed it, even though we've learned since that his widow says there had been some threats. Who knows? Well, the latest little wrinkle is that there were words etched into some of the bullet casings that were found at the scene of the murder. So the person who killed him took the time to send a message on the casings, and the two words that the public has been made aware of are deny, which was written on one, and delay on another. And this, I'd sort of been thinking that this was going to turn out to be some kind of a corporate on corporate hit, some kind of weird, who knows what. This now looks like a disgruntled person who held the insurance from this company and who did not have his claim paid, right? Delay, deny. I don't know. Wow. I mean, I'm sorry for the man and his family, but in this trigger happy nation of ours, this particular killing seems startling by the location, by the lying in wait. If you're going to take somebody out, to do it on one of the busiest, it's not particularly the busiest time, but if you know Manhattan, I mean, that is a very, very busy part of Manhattan. And in the morning, early morning, people heading to work. Really astonishing. And that the killer was able to brazenly just walk up behind him and shoot him in the back and then bike away. Wow. And is still at large. So anyway, I must admit, I don't normally get pulled into these kinds of stories, but I am finding this one. I mean, I'm curious. I'm dying to know the motive, and the delay and deny on the bullet casings sure seems to point in a certain direction. By the way, I'm also annoyed by the statements of the authorities calling this pre-planned. That's a word that annoys me, and I just want to do a little quick rant on the word pre-planned. Why do you have to say pre if you say planned? The whole definition of the word planned is sufficient. If it was a planned murder, that tells us the same thing as all of a sudden this made up word pre-planned. Planned by its nature is pre. Who comes up with these things? And then they stick. Is it because it takes a monosyllable and makes it into a duosyllable, thus making it longer and perhaps more, I don't know, weighty in every way, more important? It was pre-planned. And then I started to think, well, they also are saying it's premeditated. And does the same thing apply to that term? Probably. I don't know. I think pre is overused. Like pre-plan, the other one that just drives me up a wall is free gift. And you hear that, and you get a free gift. Well, I mean, last time I looked, the definition of gift is something given to you that you don't pay for. It's free. That's the definition of gift. A free gift. And so I guess there again, what that is an attempt to underscore the generosity of the giver, right? It's not just a gift, it's a free gift, which is, of course, the exact same thing. Okay, I'll stop. I saw something interesting. First of all, have you been keeping score? As she interrupts herself, as usual. Have you been keeping score of how many Fox News personalities are now in the Trump administration to be? How many, when you look at, of all the humans in the country that could serve the administration, how many he just plucked right out of that place of business that he spends an inordinate amount of his time watching. It's mind blowing. But somebody, and I wish I had the whole list here, said he's up to 12. Fox News, he's absolutely, I mean, I suppose the good news is he's eviscerating Fox News to a certain point. I wonder if the guys that are left, like, Sean Hannity and some of the others, are saying, "Well, how come I don't get a position? Laura Ingraham is stewing," or they could be saying, "Thank God. I mean, I like it here. I'm getting paid more, and there's better job security." But 12. I think the last one I saw was Monica Crowley. And don't even ask me what she's now in charge of. It's something like nothing terribly important. God almighty. Excuse me while I take a swig. So, oh, what I had meant to say before I interrupted myself with how many Fox News people he's choosing is someone pointed out that, and I was surprised by this. Okay, so 2 and possibly closing in on 3 of his picks. Gaetz, the Tampa sheriff. Oh, he pulled himself out, but still. Gaetz and Hegseth, who's teetering. That it is extremely, and I didn't realize this, unusual for a president's choice of a cabinet member to be rejected, even if the Senate at the time is from the opposing party. The general thing has been that a president is entitled to his, and it is his because we are a country who will not elect a woman for some reason. I can't imagine why. Whoever his picks are, it's just generally agreed, whether you think they're good or not, he's allowed. You give the president that. So it turns out that in the history of this country, only 12 nominations have been rejected by the Senate in the entire history of the country. And you have to go back 100 years, 1925, to find a cabinet nominee rejected by the president's own party. So it's been 100 years. And we've got a Republican Senate. And they said to Matt Gaetz and to Trump, ain't happening. And this, a party and a Senate that is, as we know, a cult of personality, right? That Trump is like the emperor. And you don't say no to the emperor, there will be consequences. He is vengeful. And yet, the first time in 100 years, they said no. This band of cowards called Republicans. So what does that tell us? It tells us that Trump is not as powerful as media and he would like people to believe, the image he's selling. Because he could really go down in history if Hegseth goes too. And we haven't even gotten to Kash Patel and Noam and Tulsi and RFK Jr. I mean, he could really set a record here. His own party, a party of known cowards and yes men, saying no to him. So I say this because it should give us the slightest measure of comfort in that, at least in this way, the constitutional separation of powers is still functioning, putting a check on the executive. Not much of one, perhaps, but a check. And so here's another reason why Trump might not be as powerful as we think. Presidents who are serving their second term, as he is, unbelievably, are not by law allowed to run again. And anyway, he in fact will be 150 and he ain't going to run again. So if he can't run again, he is in a way a lame duck. And lame ducks do not have as much power, simply by virtue of the fact that they cannot run again. And here's the other part. The Republicans in the Senate are feeling more powerful in standing up to him because there are very few of them up for re-election. You know, senators come up every 6 years. There was a ton of them that came up in this last election. But there are very few Republicans up for re-election to the Senate in 2 years when they would be vulnerable to a vengeful Trump primarying them or really mounting an effort to take them out. So that girds their loins a little bit as well. So just passing that on because it's something I hadn't known that it was so unusual for a cabinet choice to be rejected by the president's own party. Just saying. You look for, bright, shiny, happy things wherever you can find them. Now, having said all that, I also read somewhere that somebody said, the two choices that he's going to go to the mat for are the two former Democrats that he's tapped, both of whom are woefully inadequate. And that would be, of course, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for Health and Human Services and Tulsi Gabbard, God help us. What's her position? NEI? National, oh God, my alphabet soup. Whatever, in intelligence. That he's going to go to the mat for them. And I can't remember why, and I don't care, because God help us. Also, Kash Patel. Oh my God. I just came upon this. I want to share it with you. An assessment of his choice to head to destroy the FBI. A guy who had actually been in Trump's administration first time around, had served as deputy national security advisor, a guy named Charles Kupperman. Charles Kupperman told the Wall Street Journal this about Kash Patel, somebody that he had, in fact, yes, seen operating in the administration. He said, he's untrustworthy and he is absolutely unqualified for this job. And he added, it would be an absolute disgrace to American citizens to even consider an individual of this nature. Oh my God. Can you imagine? And now that's a Republican, a Trumpian Republican, talking about one of Trump's very important choices. I was talking to a woman who works for the federal government and has worked for them for most of her career in DC. And she's going to retire. And she's thinking, she works in a department that is going to be eviscerated, without a doubt. And she's also getting on in years. She's no spring chicken. And I said, but so what is the morale? And how, she said, it's just, we can only imagine how horrible. People are making plans. People are packing their bags. But here's the thing. These are the people that know how things work, who understand and actually were invested in the mission of whatever department or agency they have worked for. And they are going to be leaving in droves. So do not expect, if you think the government didn't exactly operate really efficiently before, just wait. Just wait. until everybody who knows how it works is gone, and the efficiency experts like Ramaswamy and Musk come in and finish it off. The government will absolutely be incapable of functioning, which will have impacts we cannot even imagine. And then stop and think, if the genius voters who brought this upon us are impacted in a negative way and choose to throw these guys out and go to the other beleaguered party, that'd be the Democrats, in 4 years, what will whoever that is be able to do? Cleanup, rebuilding, getting nowhere in terms of, just trying to get us back to a functional, semi-functional government. And that is what happens, it seems, all the time. I've said it before, Republicans come in and screw things up. The economy is never good under them. They always leave a battered economy, and Democrats come in and spend all their time cleaning up the mess. Okay, now, a different view. I'm sorry, I'm just quickly looking at some stuff that came in here. I read this thing in the Atlantic that I found fascinating, and it was very long, and I thought, well, there's no way I can condense this to share, but I just kept coming back to it and wanting to take a stab. So here comes the stab. This was a piece, I don't even know what it was titled, but it is, to me, it's a really, and somebody disquieting, unnerving, and sobering postmortem of why the Democrats lost and what this historical moment in American history actually is. That phrase, you can't see the forest for the trees. Well, we are at that point in terms of understanding the impact of this moment. And even beyond that, because this piece is about the Trumpian moment, which of course is in its 8th year, because he came on the scene 8 years ago, a little more than 8 years ago. He served as president for 4 years. Even when he was taken out and was not the president for 4 years, he was still, was he not, an excessively powerful person and a constant presence in what was happening in the country, given his hold on one of only 2 political parties, and given what he had done to the courts. And so this guy, you may have heard of him, his name is George Packer, and he starts by saying, there are very few presidents that you could say that it's has an era, that has such an impact in what they do. And he comes up with only two in our history, and even a little before. Roosevelt, FDR, who he says, brought in this extraordinary progressive period in this country, truly changed things, extended social welfare and in a way that had not ever happened before. And that if you look at that FDR impact, it lasted beyond his administration, beyond his death. You could say that he calls it the Roosevelt Republic. The Roosevelt Republic really lasted from the 1930s into the 1970s. And it was in the 1980s that we get the beginning of another truly consequential revolution of sorts, and that was Reagan, the Reagan Revolution, which brought the free market ideology back in blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I'm not going to get that far into any of this. But this guy then posits this, which just chilled me, and I suspect he's right. So you don't get these kinds of consequential presidencies that, are reverberate beyond the presidency itself very often. But he says Trump is the third now. FDR, Jesus, Reagan, and now Trump. Because he says this election has shown that the dominant political figure of this period in American history, God help us, is Donald Trump, who, by the end of this second term of his, will have loomed over our lives as long as Franklin Delano Roosevelt's dozen years as president. It doesn't matter that he didn't have the 3 terms. He was, in that interim between his 2 presidencies, hugely, hugely consequential. And he calls it the Trump reaction. And he says he's fearful. Well, he didn't say he's fearful. I'm fearful. It's really only the beginning of the impact of this. And because it is so consequential, the reason we were saying it's the most important election, this is unbelievable, can't believe it, can't, it ain't going to stop on a dime. It was years and years in the making before Trump came down the escalator. And it ain't going to disappear when his second term is finished. And Packer says, unlike so many of the other changes in presidencies, what we're in now is not progressive like the FDR era and into LBJ, and even in some ways Richard Nixon, for God's sake. It is not progressive, definitely, but it is also not conservative. That's why there's all these never Trumpers who are Republicans, who were Republicans, because they are true conservatives. The Republican Party is not a conservative party anymore. It is a radical party. It is a nationalistic, and I would argue, yes, neo-fascist party. and it is a reactionary party. So the interesting thing is, if people who know American history will say that for years and years and years, what America has always done is go sort of back and forth in this really relatively narrow area between progressivism and conservatism. And guys, that's been blown up. We progressives were sent packing by the last election. Conservatives feel they've lost their party as well. And the people in power are these new Trump reactionaries. Packer says the animating passion of Trump supporters is a reactionary turn against all of the change. And I absolutely agree with that. Against the dizzying change that we've all had to try to come to terms with. And when I say change, I'm talking about economic changes, cultural changes, globalization, the transition from an industrial economy to an information economy. That's as huge a disorienting transition as agriculture to industrial, right? Where people lose jobs, where people don't even understand organizing principles of how things are working anymore. Then you had this growing inequality between urban areas and the rest, rural and small town America. You have, in many ways, the end of traditional American family. You have the rise of disenfranchised groups. You have the browning of America. And all of that is just creates an environment that is ripe for people to react. And Trump's appeal is a vow to take back power away from these people who have changed everything. That'd be the elites and the invaders and their caravans, the brown folk. It is to take it back and return the country to its rightful owners, the real Americans, right? And what Packer says here, whether we want to believe it or not, his victory last month demonstrated the breadth of this appeal to take us back, which is, of course, impossible. To take us back. It appealed in red states, of course, but it appealed in blue. It appealed among all ages, all ethnicities, all races. And he says this kind of, when we are in a reactionary, the beginnings of a reactionary period like this, it's not pretty. It's dark. It's aggrieved. God knows we've seen the grievance. And it's insular. It's pulling away from anybody and everything else. It wants to undo what's been done, undo what was called progress. It wants to reverse history. And you could say that's just impossible. Well, yeah, but tell that to the Taliban. It wants, and we know this, they want to go back to the nation in some storybook golden age. And they like this strongman guy who they perceive as a strongman, amazingly, a cartoon figure, because they especially like that he tramples on the pieties of the elites. They love it. That's why they love his vulgarity, because they think we're the ones who sold them out. And I mean, I find all of this to be spot on. And he then turns to what the Democrats got wrong, what we guys got wrong, totally wrong. And I think he's pretty spot on with this too. We really thought, and we were waiting for it to happen, we thought that the demographic change that was happening, that the minority would become the majority, that the white folks in this country were going to be overtaken demographically by brown folks, by people of color. And our assumption was people of color belong to us, right? So we knew the Republicans' days were numbered. Their people were old and white, and our people were going to be young and brown, and we were going to rule. And because we were so sure of that, we really went down a rabbit hole with the identity stuff, with the assumption that what people were, a person of color, for instance, that all of those people that we put in these boxes shared a common experience of oppression, and that would, of course, determine their collective political behavior, which would, of course, accrue to our interests, and that the country would obviously start heading our direction, left, on immigration, on policing, on, transgender rights, you name it, because oppressed people would understand it. And if you're a person of color in our stupid imaginings, well, you're oppressed. We were wrong. That's not how people identify, totally, and certainly not when they get into a voting booth. What a simplistic, stupid thing to fall into. This last election exploded this bullshit. Nearly half of Latinos, those were supposed to be our people, and a quarter of black men voted for Trump. In New York City, Trump did better in Queens and the Bronx, which are majority non-white, oh my God, populations. What? Yeah, more people of color in the Queens and the Bronx. And Trump did better there than he did in lily white Manhattan. So much for the assumption that the Democrats knew that the future belonged to us based on demographics. And Packer points out that, and we've heard this over and over again, and it's true, Democrats have become the party of institutionalists. That's who we are. We defend the institutions. That's why we're freaking out about all these cabinet choices, in part. Much of the Democratic base, without a doubt, most of it is metropolitan. It has degrees up the wazoo. It's economically comfortable, which is to say, out of touch with the average American. And it's pro-government. That's Democrats. And Packer says, but since the 70s, the early 70s, when the Rooseveltian progressive era was ending, and we're heading into what then would be the conservative period of Reagan. Things were changing, and we paid no attention. Republicans had been the party of the college educated, of the wealthy. Democrats were the party of blue collar. That is totally flipped. Packer is a journalist, and he said he spent the last 20 years traveling around in the US, talking to people and in communities that were ravaged by, like in Pittsburgh with the steel mills going down. He went into the Rust Belt, he went into Middle America, and he talked to people. And he said three things I just kept hearing and seeing over and over again was this absolute conviction that the political game was rigged, the economic game was rigged, and not for the people, but for the elites. Also, he kept bumping into a sense that the middle class simply didn't even exist anymore. And there's a reason for all of these things. There's truth in them. And also, he saw that institutions that were supposed to provide help were seen as providing next to none. And that those institutions included the Democratic Party. And he said anyone who was really paying attention, as he was, talking to people, could see this. And he said, frankly, both parties missed it. Didn't have a clue. You know who did or had an inkling? Donald effing Trump. That broken, disenchanted, disillusioned, angry landscape of America was ripe for the pickings for Trump. So even though the conservative Republican Party missed it and the progressive Democrats missed it, Trump was able to fit right in and to appear as incredible as it may seem, as somehow the white knight who was going to finally right the wrongs. And Packer goes on to say, of course, it's it's maddening because Biden, in so many ways, really worked hard and tried to reorient the damn Democrats to be the working class party. The legislation that he passed creating jobs that don't require college degrees and in communities that had been left behind. He did all that and nobody noticed. Because, in fact, those policies are not going, they don't have an impact overnight. The impact's going to start to be felt during Trump's administration, and he will take the credit for it. And he says, of course, it's unbelievably unfair that the Republicans are considered the party of the working class. And it is unfair that a total degenerate like Donald Trump twice beat decent, capable women. It is unfair that Harris graciously conceded defeat, whereas Trump, in her position, would once again have, of course, kick-started the lies on his own behalf, undermining trust again in the democracy. And it's unfair, says Packer, that most of the media immediately moved on from Trump's hateful rhetoric, threats of violence, and started acting as if things were normal. One last thing. He said, but again, trying to buck us up a little bit here, this Trumpian reaction is more fragile than it now seems. His administration, with his Republican Congress, will overreach. They'll overreach on issues like abortion and immigration, and they will alienate important parts of this new coalition he pulled together. His administration will enact economic policies that, of course, favor the rich at the expense of the poor workers who trusted him and voted for him. And Packer finishes with this: it's quite possible that Trump will find himself once more among the least popular presidents in the country's history. But before that, and in the meantime, he is going to have enormous latitude to abuse his power for enrichment, his own and families, and for revenge, and also to shred the remaining ties that bind Americans to one another and the country to democracies around the world. Okay, that's not, believe me, that is not all of this very long piece that was in the Atlantic by George Packer, and I I really found it, for those of us who do like to have some sense of what the fuck is going on. I think Packer has, summed it up pretty well. And again, no way to do that outside of a, 5,000 page book. But I I hope you found that of interest. And that's it for me. I thank you so much for spending any time with me this week. And I hope you have a good weekend until we speak again uh, next Monday. Okay? So stay warm if you can. It actually is winter.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.